Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Remote No Pressure podcast. I'm so glad you decided to join us this week for another episode. Now, anytime I hear of someone overcoming some kind of physical adversity and living life, grabbing the bull by the horns and living life to its fullest, I always get excited. And this week we have an unbelievable guest that has overcome some tremendous adversity, Mr. Chef Eduardo Garcia from the Montana Mex food brand. He's a fly angler, he's a chef, and when he tells his story about what happens in the deep woods of Montana, it's gonna make it makes you so inspired, because I was like, how did you overcome that? Like, what? I couldn't help. Okay, let me just take a minute, because normally these intros are super short. And we're like, hey, but let me just be really honest with you. When I heard Chef Eduardo's story, I put myself in that position and I thought to myself, what would I do? What are those things that I would just give up on? Would I have just let myself die? All of these questions came through my mind, even today, as I was editing and working on the episode and getting everything typed up to send out. I'm like, what would I have done in that situation? And Chef Eduardo's story is phenomenal. It's tremendous. It's how he responded. It's how he responded to the disaster that is so inspiring. Welcome to the podcast. Let's light the fire. Well, today on the Remote No Pressure podcast, I'm super excited to have Eduardo Garcia with us. Thank you very much for joining us, Eduardo.
Yeah, you bet, Jeff. My pleasure. Glad to be here.
Yeah. We played a little phone tag there for a while, an email tag. I'm so glad that we were able to finally make it happen.
Yeah, no kidding. That was a tough one, but they say some things are worth waiting for. I'm assuming this is one of them.
Well, big shout out to Katie Webster, who was on our podcast before, who recommended you and said that you'd be a great fit for what we're doing. So I just want to say thank you to Katie for doing that.
Yeah, Katie Webster.
Yeah, how do you know Katie, by the way?
We're fishing buddies. Katie was working at a company called Mystery Ranch, makes backpacks here in Montana. That's how we met, was through Mystery Ranch. And we've stayed connected as fishing buddies, life buddies, partners. Yeah, just homies.
Great. Well, great. That's awesome. Yeah. So what do you do now, Eduardo? A little bit of that. What kind of work are you doing now?
Yeah, so a little bit of a mixed bag. I split my time between being the chef and founder of a national food brand called Montana Mex. Montana Mex, we make table sauces like ketchup and barbecue sauce, and we make some seasonings and have an avocado oil. Kind of our focus is being a clean label condiment company, so all organic, non-GMO food. So that's sort of my number one focus. And then outside of that, I do a little bit of public speaking, maybe one every 2 months, something like that, 6 a year. And then aside from that, I do a little bit in media. So currently pitching a TV show called A Hungry Life, which is a series about cooking in the outdoors on your recreational day out. And that's beyond that, I go play in the woods and I go fish when I have time.
Well, that's great. Now, you talked a little bit about fishing, and you have a movie that came out a while ago. Can you tell us a little bit about that movie?
Sure. So the film is called Charged, and you can go to chargedfilm.com to learn more about it. You can also go to Amazon. I think Amazon has it in about 15 different countries, subtitled, Hulu, iTunes. It's an 86-minute feature-length film called Charged. And Charged, in essence, is it's a little bit of a biographical journey into my life as it led up to a near life or death experience I had in 2011, where I was severely electrocuted. And yeah, the film just kind of chronicles who was the guy leading into the day I got zapped, and then obviously covers the trauma and injury. And then it really sticks with me through the recovery process, and then through the regroup and rebuild. And, beyond just kind of having a spotlight on me, I think the thing that Charged, the film, does so masterfully is it really accesses the viewer and highlights the fact that this may be Eduardo Garcia's story that we're watching, but in reality, the relationship struggles, the self-esteem, the motivation, the doubt, the recovery, those are all struggles that every single one of us has daily. And so I think that's the masterful part, is that viewers, I get messages every day, Jeff, that when people watch this film, as the title suggests, they leave watching the film just feeling charged and psyched and jazzed to just go get more out of their life. You don't know when your calling card's going to be called. You don't know how severe it's going to be. And this living life thing is pretty beautiful, right? Pretty badass. And we should be taking advantage of it no matter what the circumstance.
Yeah, that's so deep. Everything that you just said, so rich. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, seeing the video and reading the bio, can you tell us a little bit about let's start out with what happened to you. So you're in Montana, right? In the backwoods? The day.
Yes.
Yeah. And can you tell us a little bit about that day and like what happened to you?
Yeah, so it was 2011, and it was October 9th, so fall in Montana. I'm a big-time hunter. As a chef, that's sort of one of my core loves, is knowing where my food is coming from. I've been hunting since I was a kid. And I was out bow hunting, and kind of just like your normal, beautiful October day, and came across a metal barrel in the woods. And the barrel had a tuft of fur that I could see with a couple claws in the bottom of it. And this barrel, just to really paint the picture for anyone listening, imagine yourself 3 miles in the middle of kind of nowhere from the trailhead, and in a tight little drainage, there's grass and pine trees and juniper, and you come across this scrap piece of metal. So that's what it looks like. And I thought, I'll take a claw or two. And I kind of grew up in the Boy Scout way of thinking, and had friends that run nature schools, and so I'm always kind of like collecting antlers and skulls and things of nature, right, Jeff? So like for my mind, like most people, like there's probably folks listening, they're like, what? Why would you reach out and touch something dead? Like why would you do that? And yet for me, as a hunter, as an outdoorsman, like I always just kind of think, anytime you're in nature and anytime that you investigate further into what you see, that's how you become more educated into the world around you. Right. So that's all I was doing. So like I pull out a knife, put it in my left hand, kneel down, take my backpack off, put my bow down, and kneel down, knife in my left hand, to just try and, take one of these claws off. And I didn't get more than 10 inches, 12 inches from the tuft of fur in the claw before, I just received a shock of my life. 2,400 volts arced from the base of this barrel into my knife. Not that I saw it, but what I recall was intense heat on the back of my head, intense pressure in my head, and just, it's like someone plugged me into a guitar amp,
Wow.
Of noise. And yeah, and that's, ladies and gentlemen, that's what it sounds like to get electrocuted severely.
Wow.
That's
unbelievable. So did it? Yeah, keep going. It is unbelievable that you survived. That you're telling the story.
Yeah. Well, so that, like, if you were a fly on the wall or a drone above me, this guy, middle of nowhere, kneels down next to this scrap of trash metal, and all of a sudden, boom, is flat on his back. And so my eyes opened up, and I don't know where I am. I don't know what I am. I don't know what I'm doing. All I know is I'm looking at clouds. I'm looking at dappled blue sky. I see the edges of the treetops, and and it occurs to me, I'm laying down. Why am I laying down? I should get up. So I kind of internally voice to myself, get up, get to your knees. So I roll over, I get to my knees. I remember that. And then I don't remember. I remember saying, get to your knees, get to your knees. Like, you've been in a bad dream, And you're trying to get out of that dream, and every single part of you is wanting to be out of the dream, is willing to be out of the dream. You're accessing parts of your conscious decision-making program that you've never like been in touch with before, but you're reaching all corners of your being to get out of the dream.
Right.
That was me in that moment of just get to your knees. Like, you're trying to pull yourself out of this bubble. You just have to break the seal.
Uh-huh.
And so whether I was dead for a second or not, I'll never know. But I truly, like, that moment, that's what it felt like, was I was kind of like coming back into physically being on Earth. And then my next memory, so there's a pause. And then my next memory is the methodical crunch and sound of gravel beneath the foot, right? So like walking on a driveway or a dirt road, just the crunch of feet walking. And I find myself walking on this road, kind of on some foothills covered in sage and grass, but on a road. And, my recollection just starts coming back to me. Like, why am I walking? What's going on here? And, I kind of survey the geography, and then I recognize certain features. I recognize like a hilltop over there and a mountain over there and the river below me. And, oh, okay, I think I'm in this area. I think I'm in Montana. Like, I think I'm home. I think I'm at home. Why the hell am I walking here? And then I recall, like, oh, I was hunting, right? Like, I think I was hunting today. Just like coming out of like a crazy dream space.
Wow.
And so I just start piecing it together, right? Like, as you do. Like when you get the wind knocked out of you, it takes you a second to gather all your bits and pieces again.
Right.
Like, I think that's kind of the scenario times 1,000, right? So
wow.
I'm coming back into my senses. And then, of course, at some point, I smell the smelling salts, and I'm like fully awake and conscious and like, oh shit, I was hunting. I was hiking. I saw a barrel that had some fur in it. I was trying to oh shit, I took my knife. Like, was that noise I heard? Did I get shot? Did I get electrocuted? And then, of course, as soon as I get to that point of my recollection, I immediately just look at myself, like look down at my body while walking the whole time. And I see that I'm holding bear spray in my right hand, and my left hand is like, my elbow is bent at a 90 to my body, and my left hand is just curled and gripped into a claw. And yet the hand itself is just charred black with like white pieces of bone showing, like super gnarly, right?
Oh my gosh. Holy cow.
No, it's super gnarly. And I look at that, I'm like, oh my God, I got electrocuted. I'm severely burnt. I'm walking to get help. And then like compound on that understanding. And that's what happens for like the next minute or so while I'm walking is, holy shit, I'm walking to save my life. Oh my God, I got electrocuted. I am dying right now. And now it's not that I've never seen anyone severely electrocuted, right? So I think it's one of those things, like when you have a stomach ache, how do you know you have a stomach ache? Because you feel it, right? Like when you have a headache, you feel it. And so I got to tell you, I don't ever need to sign up. Like, I've been there, got the t-shirt. I don't ever need to go there again. But in that moment, I knew I was dying. Like, I knew that I had just exploded from the inside out, and I had a very finite amount of time to go get professional help. And yet I'm in no position to run. And so I literally just start chanting to myself with no voice coming out of me, but internally chanting, don't stop walking, don't stop walking, don't stop walking. And I go to the valley floor, just keep pushing and get help, get to a cabin. They call 911. And within 2 hours, within like 3 hours, I guess I was at Salt Lake City Burn Trauma Center. Most expensive flight of my life.
Well, so when I can only imagine, but when you were knocked back and you said, you don't remember really getting up, you knocked back and then all of a sudden you're walking on a gravel road and were you feeling pain at all? Like when you started coming out of this?
No. I mean, that's the crazy thing is that I didn't feel pain until day 5, but that's how I remember it anyway, with my friends and my my sister and my ex-girlfriend Jen and my mom, my brother, those that were there in the first 5 days, I'm certain I was in excruciating pain. However, I simply don't recall consciously feeling the sensations of pain until my fifth day. And so that's a product of being in shock. As you know, we all know what shock is, and being in shock. And as soon as I received medical care, I'm certain that my, the pain medication regimen that they put me on only grew in its quantity and in its, the sort of like cocktail mix up until I was sufficiently sedated,
Wow, that's unbelievable. That's unbelievable. So this is all documented in the movie Charged. So you wake up. I mean, how long were you in the hospital? How long was the recovery time for you?
Yeah, so I spent 50 days total. I can't actually remember. I have to read my medical records. It's 48 to 50 days in burn trauma ICU before I was released.
So did they know that the line was down, that the utility company go out there and like fix that thing immediately, or like?
Oh yeah, man. Oh yeah, immediately. And I guess I have this all hearsay, but what I can share publicly is that the site was secured that very day, and I've come to learn that it was a buried power line that was going to a backcountry cabin and through national forest. And everyone asks like, well, what the hell was it? Well, I get two questions actually, Jeff. A, what was it? And B, why in the heck would you go near that thing? And to answer the first question, it's like, well, they were bringing power to this cabin on big spools, rolling it out. And at some point they ran out and they brought a new spool in, and they spliced the two ends together. And oftentimes they'll just bury that whole splice. In this instance, they put a can over it and kept the splice exposed as a junction box, as an access point. And unfortunately for me, the lid to that box became compromised. It hadn't been serviced in many decades. And the lid rusted and the locks rusted and the lid fell off and exposed this live chunk of wire in the base of this barrel that, it was my lucky day to find it, I guess, yeah.
So when you're coming out of the hospital on day 50, I mean, do you feel like this is the first day of like the rest of your life? I mean, what was that? I mean, you had so much, 50 days in the hospital, I'm sure there were so many milestones that you hit, because supposedly you were supposed to die. I mean, doctors were saying, hey, this guy's just walking dead, man. So I'm sure there were a lot of milestones that you hit in those 50 days of being in the hospital. But what was it like that first day when they set you free to leave the hospital?
Yeah. It was intimidating, right? I remember being super just scared, honestly. There's a probably fairly common scenario that happens in trauma and care situations, like an ICU stay, in that especially for longer durations of time, whereby that place, and it's the hospital in this conversation, becomes your new normal, right? It becomes what you know. And, whereas you mentioned, Jeff, like, God, do you feel like it's the beginning of the rest of your life? Well, I think that happens in ICU, actually. Like, I think in ICU, you're kind of, when it's as severe as my case was, I mean, you got someone wiping your butt for you. You got someone feeding you. You got someone scratching your nose for you because you're just bandaged head to toe and you can't do anything for yourself. And so through the physical act of handing over all of your needs back to someone else to care for, you really kind of regress back into an infantile type of a place. And and then you build up, right? Like, so day 10, day 15, day 20, day 30, you're doing something new. You're doing something else for yourself. Maybe you're eating again and holding a fork. Maybe you're walking again. Maybe you're checking emails, running your business from your laptop. Like, and so by the time you're released, you're kind of back up on the horse in the most kind of like first step kind of a way. And all of a sudden, so all of a sudden, it's like being in preschool for the first time at 30 years old. You're scared. You're like, oh my gosh, are people going to make fun of me? Are they, are folks going to wonder, God, why is that guy missing a hand? Or, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's that's what was going through my mind. It was just very uncomfortable, very scared, very nervous. And, it was a very tough day, really.
That's unbelievable. So you were a chef, right? And were you nervous that was going to affect your job? And I mean, what were those thoughts coming to you?
Yeah. So, I have been cooking since I was 15, starting with flipping burgers and throwing pizzas here in Southwest Montana. And then after high school, I went to culinary school, got a degree in the culinary arts, and continued to work in restaurants. And then in 2000, it was 2000, kind of in the spring, I got a job as a chef on a yacht. And for the next 10 years, worked on various boats throughout the world as a private chef, basically. And so yeah, I mean, the 15 years leading up to my injury, from 15 till 30, food is what I knew, whether it was working in a restaurant or cooking for private families. Food is what I knew. And, however, I should preface, like, yes, I was in ICU thinking, how am I going to do this again? How am I going to cook again? I should paint an appropriate picture. So in 2011, before my injury, I had left the yachting industry permanently for good to focus on the food brand I mentioned earlier, Montana Mex, and also to focus on the TV show concept that I was working on pitching. So my chefing had transformed from cooking every day, holding a knife every day, and cooking for families and individuals, to chefing for the company, Montana Mex, and creating recipes, working on those recipes, like building a national food brand. My role was chef, research and development, create the products, right?
Right.
So yes, to answer your question, I'm in the ICU. I'm missing a hand. I just gone through hell. I'm 21 surgeries deep, and I'm figuring out, I am thinking, how am I going to go do this again? How am I going to be on TV and have a TV show inspiring people to be active in the outdoors? I don't even know if I could hold a fishing rod again. I don't know if I'm going to be able to ski again. I don't know if I'm going to be able to swim again. And it's not that I go through life as an individual that thinks I'm not going to be able to do those things. But I mean, quite obviously, when you lose your hand, that is the next step is, okay, how do I then operate with one hand? And of course, cooking was a question I asked myself. How do I chop again? How do I do this again?
Oh yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine. So like, as far as chopping, and you worked all that stuff out, what was that process like, learning how to cook with one hand?
I dropped a lot of stuff. Dropped a lot of things. It was a slow process. Honestly, it was a slow process, and frustrating, but it's also, one of those things that, let's say, so I picked up a few catering gigs after my injury, and obviously continued to work for the company, which required a certain amount of cooking and a certain amount of kitchen time. And I think I just kind of would realize, like, okay, this is slower, working in this capacity in the kitchen, stirring something, cleaning something, holding something, chopping, it's a slower process, but I think this is doable. And so I would work on it and just methodically kind of focus on getting better, getting quicker, being more efficient with my movements. And, but of course there were other tasks where I realized, like, I could probably peel all of those potatoes, but God, that's going to take me a long time. potentially I could ask someone working with me or bring in help to tackle the list of things that I just am not suited for anymore, and redirect my energies towards a new focus, you know? And so that was kind of the process, and just required patience and a bunch of humility.
Speaking of humility, I mean, you had mentioned when you woke up in ICU, I mean, someone else is wiping your butt, scratching your nose, doing those basic things, some of them very personal that, you know, you're like, well, I hope that never happens to me when I get older, that someone has to change me or wipe my butt, you know. As a young man, having someone else do all of those things, obviously it's a very humbling experience. How did you process that?
You know, they say that it's the things in life that bring you to, let's say, it's the things that happen to you in life that tee you up for the opportunity to succeed in the future, or something like that, right?
Yeah, sure.
it's something like that. So
right.
So, well, I want to answer the question, but I have to throw that out there because, two things, you know, my dad had a heart surgery in 2005, and I was, you know, there with my family and very much by his side for the duration of his hospital stay. There were a few post-operative complications, so he was in hospital for about 30 days. And I just remember being completely involved as much as I could be as a care provider to my dad. And that afforded me a serious front seat experience to ICU, heart surgeries, recovery, just some pretty heavy duty hospitalization, you know? So I think that set me up for a little bit, that set me up well for my own experience, that it was not the first time I was in a medical facility with a lot on the line. And then the other part of it is you know, I think it's kind of a no-brainer for the human brain and human psyche that beneath all of it, we have the luxury of deciding how we dress ourselves, how we present ourselves to the wide world, how we interchange with the wide world, and yet when we are kind of on death row, you know, when we are on that precipice between life or death, there's not really that much left in the equation. It's just all in or you're out, man. So in that scenario, it's you know, like you may be butt naked having someone help you do all of these otherwise intimate and very, you know, things you learn how to do when you lose your diapers at 2, but it doesn't matter anymore because it's that's the focus is on saving your life, and this is just a part of that. You know, this is part of that process. It's like you're stuck in the mud and someone says, you know, well, you got to put some chains on. Well, it's no question. You just put some chains on.
Right. You don't stop and think, I don't know if I want to put chains on. You just put chains on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that decision making along those levels is a luxury afforded us by, you know, by our lives and the opportunity to have a little bit of leisure where we can make those choices. But quite often it's, in that scenario, there is no choice. You just roll with it. You know, could you imagine? That's actually funny that we were talking about this, Jeff. I couldn't even imagine it, looking at a nurse and saying, actually, I'm uncomfortable with you doing that.
Yeah.
And like, what is she going to say? She's going to look back at you and say, well, I'm sorry, buddy, but it's kind of like no choice here.
Yeah, I think I'd like to just sit here in my feces. I'm good. No, you just get it done, exactly. You know? Yeah. Wow. Now, one of the quotes that you had is on your website, it's, you know, you left the shell of a man that you were on the floor of the forest in Montana. What do you mean by that? I mean, I know you've talked a lot about how you know this experience changed your life, but what are some traits you have now? Because you're quite a bit of ways on the other side of it. You're a pretty good distance on the other side of it. How different are you now? Are you more like a more authentic person, no BS, because, hey, there's nothing to prove anymore, or can you tell us a little bit about some of the things that you've changed as a man through that process?
Yeah. I think the quote, I'm not looking at it, but I left the shell of the man who I was on the forest floor that day. I think in large part, so go back to being in the hospital 2011 and really being reborn in many senses as an amputee, not really knowing what the long-term effects of having 2400 volts going through my body, so not knowing if it was going to affect my brain, my thinking, my hearing, my sight, like any of my functions. The one thing that I could, so like no control, right? It's kind of just every day from here on forward is going to be a revelation of sorts, right?
Right.
And so that quote, I think, speaks to the kind of the conscious thought process that I had. I mean, you can imagine sitting in ICU, totally rocked. There's going to be time to really think about, who am I? What am I? Why am I here today? And where am I going?
Sure.
And there is quite naturally an expected amount of gratitude that I would assume anyone in my scenario is going to feel. And for certain in my situation, I believe I just felt more like I felt gratitude like I'd never experienced it before.
Wow.
Right. So if there was a way to truly feel the sort of holy definition of a word, I was living that definition. Like I couldn't look at someone and not feel love and gratitude and thanks. Right. And so that started this reaction inside of me whereby I was kind of just like looking, I wasn't beating myself up for being an asshole that one time in my life or making a poor decision that other time in my life, but rather I think it was in a moment of just being so grateful for the life I had and everyone around me that I think it was just a revelation of sorts where I just decided, all right, well, there's no better time, right? There's no better time to really rewrite the person I want to be moving forward and leave the junk, leave the excess, leave all that stuff, that the baggage behind, and let's learn from it and really be accountable on being my best self moving forward. Easier said than done, but that was kind of my focus, like that was sort of the battle cry that I would chant to myself for, really from starting in ICU till today, 7 years later.
Let's talk about the movie Charged. I know we've talked a lot about it on the movie, or about the movie on the episode so far, but what is the one thing that you want people to take away from your movie?
The one thing? Let's try like the 100 things. No. So yeah, like that. Look, that's tough and that's easy. And so if we were to just limit it to one thing, I think it probably has to boil down to we are responsible for our own decisions, which is not new to anybody. But rather than feeling stressed or feeling burdened by that responsibility, I would just propose that we be empowered by that responsibility to be the president of a country, to be a brain surgeon, to be an organic farmer, to be a mechanic that makes sure people's cars are safe on the road, to be a chef, to be, you name it. If you're whatever it is that you decide you want to put yourself into, short or long term, my hopeful takeaway would be that folks watch Charged and feel like they just plugged into their new self in whatever capacity it is that they are living life. Right. That's the title for a reason. I got zapped with 2400 volts I don't ever wish that anyone else receive that same treatment. However, I would love to propose that by watching the film and witnessing my experience, and that others are able to tap into their own life story and get a charge via the documentary, via watching the film, and wake up that next morning and do push-ups for the first time in 5 years, go to the gym for the first time in 2 months, say I love you to the neighbor or to your partner or to their kids, right? Like kind of just turn life up by 10 times, by 100 times immediately after watching the film. I mean, that is what I'm in it for, Jeff. I mean, that's why I agreed to make the film and be available for the film. Is I was hopeful that folks would watch the film and just feel boosted.
Some of the clips on the video shows you fly fishing. Can you tell us about that process and how you took fly fishing up after you became? I'm assuming you were fly fishing before you became an amputee, but after you became an amputee, can you tell us a little bit about that process on how you taught yourself how to fly fish again?
Man, it was hard. Lots of knots. Yeah, so I grew up fishing, rod and reel, drowning worms, ripping lures in Montana for trout and whitefish and anything else that was going to bite. And, I got into fly fishing in high school at some point. And, yeah, I remember going out fly fishing for the first time since, post-injury. And I went down to the Yellowstone River, which is the river that flows a few miles from my home where I grew up. And I remember going to a side channel, and I mean, how did I get back into fishing? I strung my rod up. I tied it all back together. I, looked at my leader, looked at my tippet, put the two ends together. Took about 35 to 40 minutes to figure out how to work my prosthetic in a way that it was going to hold the line and I could get a good solid knot, and then tied the fly on and got probably over ambitious and tied a dropper off of it. And, and then of course, you strip. So it was clumsy, man. It took time. It was clumsy. And of course, I could cast, any of us, if you're a fly fisherman out there and you've been doing it for any length of time and are somewhat, skilled with it, you could cast with one hand. You could strip all the line out with one hand. You could start short with the line you're running through your trigger finger, and you could just one-handed get her done.
Right.
And for the most part, that's what I did. I got like 20 feet out and just limited myself to just upstream mend, let it drift, upstream mend, let it drift, and was fishing one-handed. And that got me back on the river, and that makes it sound easier, but of course, easier than it was. But, of course, I broke, I think that dropper, like, you're trying to hug the bank with a grasshopper or something, and that 18-inch dropper snagged something, and I broke it off, and I cried and took my vest off, and I had to physically sit down to concentrate on tying the whole rig back together again. And thankfully now, now it's a quicker process, but I'm still figuring it out, I'm still figuring out how to strip a streamer accurately, how to, good luck getting a double haul in there, so I'm still trying to work on it, just trying to work on it, and I'm getting there little by little.
Well, I think it shows a lot about your personality too, Eduardo. I think a lot of people would be like, oh, I can't do that anymore, and not even try, because that's just such a debilitating, losing an arm. I think a lot of people just give up. And I think a lot of people would give up on life, make excuses and say, I can't do that, or I can't do that. But, you really faced the adversity head on and said, no, screw it. I'm just going to go all in. And that's pretty inspiring. And so we really appreciate you sharing your story. If there's someone out there that may be going through something similar, or maybe they're going through a debilitating disease or cancer, or maybe they're, because you went through the cancer battle as well while we didn't really touch on that too much, but while you were going through all this, you had cancer as well. What would you say to people who are maybe going through that really hard time and they just want to say, screw it, I'm not going to fish anymore. I can't work anymore. I can't do this. What would you tell them?
Well, you're going to think I'm a total. Okay. So 2 things. And I can hear my family in the background, like chiding on me, like on my good Eduardo shoulder while the other Eduardo's on the other shoulder. But what I mean, Jeff, I'm one of those individuals that really, and this has not always served me, but I really I believe there's a certain amount of stoke and fire in everybody. And this was me before my injury, just so you know, before my injury, I sort of have always been a fiery individual and super psyched and fairly optimistic. And, this didn't always come across the right way to others. Folks be like, God, you're so pushy, or, don't tell me how to run my life. That was kind of a response I get from folks, because I was always just trying to fire people up to get the most out of life, to get the best out of life. And I'm still that person, but now you double down with this life, this life experience I had where I almost died, and look out, because I'm even more that person now. So, but I am understanding and gentle, and I get it, so I realize that one of my core goals and interests is to really impact others positively, and not so that I get off at the end of the day, but because I want to see others succeed, right? I want to see other people actualizing their complete selves, 100%. And I realize there's a certain amount of tact and care that needs to be present. So, upon meeting, if I meet someone, which I do often, who needs a little, is struggling, I think the number one thing I kind of do is I just listen. Honestly, I just ask, what's going on? And I give them time. I give them time to just get it out, spit it out, share what's up, get it off their chest. And then, I don't have any answers more often than not for their specific situation. I mean, it's rare that someone says something, you're like, oh, talk to Dr. So-and-so, or talk to this guy. That's your guy, man.
Right.
More often than not, it's just listening to them and giving them time, telling them it matters, telling them they matter. And then secondly, and then following up on that is just saying, hey, whatever it is you are going through is what you're meant to go through, and you got to own that. You got to know, that's the deal here, is that most of the time, especially in this, most of the time, whatever we're going through is something that it's a part of who we are. It's a part of who we will become. And the sooner that we just embrace and love whatever it is that's happening, the sooner we're freed up to move on with actually dealing with it and getting with the work done. Right? So,
yes.
More often than not, we are so stuck in our own and stymied in our own head game of, why am I here? Why did this happen to me? Whose fault is this? Whereby just to take some accountability and say, you know what, regardless of all of those things, I am here today. This is who I am.
Right.
This is where I want to go, and make a short list. What is the first step forward? And it literally could be, tomorrow I'm waking up and I'm filling out that application, and go do it without fail. Let nothing stop you. Just like walking out of the woods, it's like walking out of the woods that day for me. I chanted to myself, I don't know, 3 miles. I don't know how long it took me to stumble out of the woods. And I don't know how many times I said it to myself, but it could have been thousands of times. When was the last time any of us did anything in repetition? And then when you think about that, and you think about the last time you did anything in repetition, so you think about the most beautiful hand-tied streamer you've ever seen, and you're like, oh yeah, that guy's tied thousands of those. That's why it's so sweet.
Right.
Right. So it's take all those life examples, and just, I think we all know how to do it, right? We all know how to do it, and it just starts with putting our best foot forward and saying, all right, I'm going to tackle this.
Yeah. Just baby steps, and what's the next step ahead of you?
Exactly.
Yeah. And, well, if people wanted to learn more about you, more about your food brand, but also check out the movie or get in touch with you, what would they need to do, Eduardo?
Yeah, so I would say if you want to check out the food brand, please go to montanamix.com, read about it. Better yet, go to our products page and buy something. Check it out. Get yourself an organic sauce. Try it out. 5% of our proceeds go to a group called the Challenge Athletes Foundation. So not only are you putting some tasty goodness in your meals, in your family's bellies, but you're also helping a great organization that helps people with disabilities. And then if you want to learn more about what I'm up to, you can go to chefeduardo.com or follow along on Instagram at chefeduardo. And and then of course, Charged Film. You could find and download the film Charged on iTunes or Amazon or Hulu, or you go to the website chargedfilm.com and check it out.
Well, we'll put all those links up in the show notes, and I just greatly appreciate your time, and thank you for your inspirational message that you've given us today, and all of our listeners. We're just so grateful for you, Eduardo. I'm so glad we can make it happen.
Yeah, Jeff, at long last, I'm super psyched that we made it happen. And tight lines. And, thank you to anyone who tuned in. And I look forward to hearing from all of you. Please reach out.
Well, thank you, Chef Eduardo. And thank you for joining us for another episode of the Remote No Pressure Podcast. Be sure to check out our website at remotenopressure.com, on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter. You know where we're at. And until next time, go fishing.